Hey everyone, and welcome. In the world of global business, you've probably heard the story a million times, that technology, data, and AI have completely flipped the script. But is that just hype, or is it the real deal? Today we're going to dig into some fascinating research that puts that very idea to the test. And the answer might just surprise you.
So, let's get right to it. This is the big question we're tackling today. We're constantly being told that the old rules are out the window, that we're in a brand new digital age. This explainer is all about finding out if that's actually true when it comes to companies trying to make it big around the world.
All right, so first up, let's talk about the big idea that's everywhere right now. It's this very attractive, very modern theory that says a company's success today, especially when entering new markets, is all about its digital muscle. The idea is that digital isn't just a part of the business anymore, it is the business.
And of course, there's a fancy name for this, digital determinism. It's this core belief that things like AI, big data, and digital platforms are now way more important than old school stuff like, market size or good roads. A major champion of this idea is a framework called the Digital Sovereignty Governance Theory, or DSGT for short.
So if you're following this playbook, what's the game plan? Well, it claims your number one weapon is your digital skill set. It says you've got to play by a country's specific data laws, get the right governments on your side, and get this, even see things like weak infrastructure, which they call institutional voids, as a golden opportunity to swoop in and innovate. And you got to admit, it sounds pretty compelling, right? Very cutting edge. But when you start looking a little closer, some pretty serious cracks start to show up in this whole digital-first idea. So let's start poking some holes in it.
Okay, flaw number one. It's just way too complicated. This theory uses 35, that's right, 35 different propositions to make its case. And sometimes when a theory needs that many rules to work, it isn't a sign that it's super sophisticated. It's often a sign that it's just trying way too hard to make the facts fit. Second, there's a huge cause and effect problem. The theory says that a country's digital savvy is what attracts investment. But what if it's the other way around? What if it's the massive foreign investment that actually builds up a country's digital highways in the first place? It's that classic chicken and egg dilemma.
Flaw number 3 is a biggie. It's called survivor's bias. We all hear the amazing stories about the huge digital successes, the Ubers and Alibabas of the world. But this theory totally ignores the thousands upon thousands of digital companies that tried and failed. For every single winner, there is a massive graveyard of losers that this theory just doesn't talk about.
And finally, and this kind of ties it all together, a lot of the core concepts are, well, they're pretty vague. Take a term like algorithmic reciprocity. It sounds really impressive, right? But what does it actually mean? How do you measure it in the real world? And if you can't measure it, how can you possibly claim it's the main thing driving success?
Okay, so keeping all those flaws in mind, it's time for the fun part. Let's do some myth busting. We're going to take 3 of the biggest claims from this digital is king theory and see how they hold up against some cold, hard data. This is where it gets really interesting.
Myth number 1. The idea that digital infrastructure is the new magnet for foreign cash. Well, just look at this chart. The difference is night and day. The data from 2015 all the way to 2025 is crystal clear. The biggest driver for investment by a long shot is still the basics, having a big market of customers and good old-fashioned physical stuff. Ports, roads, and a reliable power grid. Digital infrastructure? Yeah, it's on the chart, but it's absolutely dwarfed by the fundamentals.
Now for myth number 2. This is that really clever-sounding idea that institutional voids, things like a shaky legal system or bad logistics, are actually a secret opportunity. But as the research in this quote points out, that idea really only seems to work if you cherry-pick a few lucky examples and ignore all the rest.
And this table just lays out exactly why. An opportunity? No way. These voids are massive, measurable costs. Unreliable markets can jack up your borrowing costs by up to 8%. A weak legal system, that can add a whopping 40% to every single contract. These aren't opportunities, they're just expensive problems.
All right, get ready for myth number 3, because this number is an absolute showstopper. The digital is king theory makes a huge deal about geopolitics, but the data shows that a staggering 92% of international business deals have absolutely nothing to do with geopolitics.
So you're probably asking, okay, what about the other 8%? Well, turns out most of that is just routine regulatory paperwork. And those huge headline-grabbing dramas, the stuff you see on the news with companies like TikTok or Huawei, that accounts for less than 2% of the total picture. If we only focus on those rare cases, we get a totally warped view of how global business actually works day to day.
So if the digital is king theory is built on some pretty shaky ground, what's the alternative? What does the evidence actually point to? Let's take a look at a much more grounded reality.
And the answer is actually captured perfectly in this quote. We don't need to throw out 100 years of business knowledge and start over. The old rulebook doesn't need a revolution, it just needs a few smart tweaks for the modern world.
And this brings us to the alternative, the Strategic Resource Positioning Theory, or SRPT. And honestly, it's so much more straightforward. It argues that success still comes down to the classic building blocks, having superior resources and knowing how to use them. We're talking about things like a powerful brand that people trust, technology that your competitors can't copy, deep pockets, and the absolute best talent. Digital tools are great for making these things better, but they don't replace them.
Now, if you need one slide to sum it all up, this is it. This is the knockout punch. When you actually analyze what explains a company's performance, that traditional resource position, brand, tech, capital, accounts for a massive 68% of their success. And those trendy digital factors we've been talking about, digital capabilities explain just 4%. Geopolitics, a tiny 2%. The numbers really don't lie. It's not even a close fight.
So, what's the big lesson here? Where does this all leave us? Well, in a world that's obsessed with the next big thing, it turns out that the fundamentals, the core principles of good business, are still king. Really, the biggest takeaway for all of us is just a simple lesson in critical thinking. The next time you hear one of those grand, sweeping claims that this changes everything, just take a second. Ask to see the data behind the hype. And just remember that in business, like in most things, the fundamentals usually stick around for a very good reason.
At the end of the day, if we had to boil this whole thing down to just one sentence, it would be this. Digital is an incredibly powerful tool. It can absolutely make a good company better, faster, and smarter. But it is not a magic wand that can conjure success out of nothing.
And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. In this constant rush to chase what's new and shiny, are we accidentally forgetting the timeless principles that have always been the real foundation of success? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.